Does it even matter if Donald Trump were to go on Joe Rogan's podcast? I'm making this video because I actually think that the answer to this question is no. And I'm going to make this in response to some things I've been seeing lately on Twitter. But here's a post from a pretty large account, Ashley St. Clair, saying it's time Joe Rogan should have Trump on. You see, this is from earlier today, August 28th, 2024. And then see my reply that got no likes or no views. But anyway, lots of people agree to this and just kind of saying that they think that Donald Trump should go on Joe Rogan's podcast. I would argue, like again, this is overdue. And I've seen this as well on Twitter in general. But I would argue it does not matter because Joe Rogan now is still the top podcast, but only by a little bit. In 2020, I think he was miles ahead of everybody else, but the gap has closed. And that's a lot of, by the way, due to Joe Rogan. Like, he's a pretty generous person. He'll promote Lex Fridman, Theo Vaughn. A lot of those podcasts have caught up to him. But if you remember, Patrick Bet-David also had this sentiment and in a pretty cringe way, really, tried to sell Joe Rogan to have Donald Trump on his podcast.
So when are you having Trump on?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe.
Looks like there's going to be no mainstream media 20 years from now. You know that, I know that. To look back and say Joe never interviewed Trump, that's kind of weird. You're here, Joe. Everybody else is below you.
Now, in Patrick Bet-David's defense, this clip was over a year ago, so he's kind of operating a little bit in that clip on some old information because I definitely don't think Joe Rogan has as much cultural relevance right now as he did 2-3 years ago. Like, there was a moment just kind of even pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and a little bit even post-pandemic, Joe Rogan was like the news. Everyone went there. He had all these scientists on. He was basically more credible than all of media for a while. Maybe still is to some degree, but you could almost say that just for the alternative media / podcast space in general, which again, Joe Rogan deserves a ton of credit for being a pioneer in that space. I don't believe that Donald Trump has to go on. You can disagree with me in the comments if you want. I definitely think it would be interesting. I would definitely watch. Joe Rogan's a very good interviewer. He would ask probably very unique questions. But looking at the podcast charts here, we can see that at least, I mean, the thing is, Theo Vaughn just did have Donald Trump on, so that's potentially why his numbers are being boosted. But right now, in Spotify top podcasts, Theo Vaughn is number one. You see Joe Rogan's not even in the top two of these other, or Apple, but I should say that there might be Spotify might have the rights to, it probably is only just on Spotify, so forget I said that. But anyways, only number 2 on Spotify. And you can see there are these other major podcasts which have sprouted up, like Tucker Carlson's a huge show since he's been let go from Fox. He's come up, and Donald Trump was on there before, I believe, and perhaps I would predict that Donald Trump will go on Tucker Carlson again once more, at least before the election. He was on Theo Vaughn. He was on this show here, Sean Ryan. Again, these podcasts probably do get. Here we go, Joe Rogan. So that he actually is included in the Apple podcast chart. You see, he's in 5th now. I would say if you're gonna go, who's the biggest podcast in the world overall, it would be Joe Rogan. Maybe if you measure it at any specific time, you could have someone having a boost and being a little bit above him. But if you just looked at, I'm guessing here, like a 2-year rolling average, I'm sure Joe Rogan comes out on top. And he still probably does have the most cultural importance, but I just believe that the gap has been closed by so many other shows that getting on Joe Rogan is not as big of a deal as it used to be. It was almost like getting on Joe Rogan was almost like getting on Johnny Carson for a while. Back in the day, if you're a comedian. Like another thing that would be kind of interesting, actually, is see this number 6 here, if Donald Trump could get on a show like Call Her Daddy. I actually think that would be a great play if you could pull that off. And as long as the interviewer, like in this case, Alex Cooper, wasn't just totally unhinged and just trying to do a hit job against him. But even then, I think that could potentially be a space where there's some new voters that probably wouldn't be so open to the Trump message, because a lot of these, like I'm sure Tucker Carlson show, Joe Rogan Experience, Theo Vaughn, the audience for those podcasts is probably quite similar. And another thing, which I'm going to pull up here, just off the stream, very popular podcast who gets routinely millions of views on YouTube. We didn't see him on that top podcast chart, but I would be guessing if he's not up there, he's right there. Is looking at this here. We have Lex Fridman announced today, I'm doing a podcast with real Donald Trump soon. Let me know if you have any questions / topic suggestions. So, yeah, I would just say that I think the combination of Donald Trump getting on Lex Fridman, Theo Vaughn, he did that massive one, biggest show perhaps in history, depending on exactly how you measure, but he did that incredibly huge X space with Elon Musk. I think that the combination of all these shows certainly outweighs a Joe Rogan appearance podcast. I think it's almost got to the point where being on Lex and being on Theo Vaughn, I think those two appearances alone would outweigh one Joe Rogan podcast appearance. That's my opinion. Again, let me know in the comments if you disagree with that. But in terms of the impact it could have on the election, I don't think Joe Rogan is as far ahead as he was even back, say, 2020. I think Joe Rogan could have swung the election either way a ton. I think he was, in terms of how many people listened to him and just look to him even for like advice or life advice, stuff like that, he was so far ahead of everybody. But there's been so many people now, Jordan Peterson even, who have come up to kind of be leaders in our culture. And one more thing I'll pull up here, which is kind of the reason I wanted to make this, because Donald Trump and Joe Rogan are not exactly the greatest of friends. See if I can get this up here. And yeah, I'll pull it up here. I got the picture here. Just zoom in on that. Because this is what Donald Trump has to say about Joe Rogan recently, because Joe Rogan had some nice thing to say about RFK Jr., who interestingly just endorsed Donald Trump. So, I mean, maybe Joe Rogan will come along to being supportive of Donald Trump. We will see, but Joe Rogan said on his podcast that that RFK was the only person that made sense to him. So, and basically ruled out Biden, Kamala, and Trump. But because of those remarks Donald Trump said on Truth Social, it'll be interesting to see how loudly Joe Rogan gets booed the next time he enters the UFC ring, MAGA 2024. Now, lots of people in the MAGA world liked this approach from Trump, but a lot of people did not like it. I don't know. I don't, to be honest, I did not mind it, because Donald Trump is trying to win an election. He's not trying to make Joe Rogan happy. I know many people in the middle thought this was a miscalculation by Donald Trump, an unforced error. I can see Donald Trump's point of view on this one. If you're going to be on the biggest podcast in the world and you see the only presidential candidate that makes sense is RFK, you're leaving out Donald Trump in that statement. I can see Donald Trump's point of view there, but anyway, it'll be interesting going forward. I do hope, as just a viewer that would enjoy to see that episode, it'd be nice to see Donald Trump on the Joe Rogan show. But again, the main point of this video, in summary, I certainly do not think it is necessary, just because so many podcasts have caught up, maybe not caught totally up, but they're very close in second place. So with that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. Have a good day.